right, then we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for coming today. I think a lot of you were able to come to Christy's event last spring when we hosted her. And you'll see that I'm in the library at the moment, and so is Nicole. So we're excited to be in the building for a minute and have some books behind us. But I'm going to introduce Christy to y'all, and also Nicole Sneed will be interviewing Christy. So how many of you can just raise your hand have read Christy's books before? Okay, pretty much everybody. Great. So have y'all read the new one yet? Working on it?
Working on it.
Working on it. Okay, me too. So Kristy Woodson Harvey is the best-selling author of Dear Carolina, Lies and Other Acts of Love, Slightly South of Simple, The Secret to Southern Charm, and The Southern Side of Paradise. Most of you probably know that since you're all familiar with her books. She's the winner of the Lucy Bramlett Patterson Award for Excellence in Creative Writing, a finalist for the Southern Book Prize, and her work has been optioned for film, and her books have received numerous accolades. She blogs with her mom, Beth Woodson, on Design Chic about how creating a beautiful home can be the catalyst for creating a beautiful life. Design Chic is the inaugural member of the Design Blogger Hall of Fame, sponsored by Traditional Home, and winner of Amara's Best Luxury Blog as chosen by Roberto Cavalli. She's a Phi Beta Kappa summa cum laude graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Journalism, and holds a master's in English from East Carolina University with a concentration in multicultural and transnational literature. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications and websites, including Southern Living, Traditional Home, Parade, USA Today, Domino, Our State, and O. Henry. She has been seen in Today.com, Women's Health, The Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report, The Huffington Post, Marie Claire's The Fix, Woman's World, Reader's Digest, Bustle, New York Live, and North Carolina Book Watch, among others. And she lives in North Carolina with her husband and her son. So we're gonna, in just a minute, let Nicole interview her for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for about 15 minutes, if that sounds good. We also have we have 20 copies of the new title, Feels Like Falling, to give away to those of you who have attended today. So we may be emailing you to get your address, and that way we can figure out how we want to deliver it to you. And Christy has also sent us some signed book plates that we will insert into your copy of Feels Like Falling. So I'll be contacting you shortly about that. So I want to introduce Nicole as well. Nicole Sneed is a regular patron of the Florence Library. She loves listening to audiobooks on our Libby app for audiobooks and ebooks, and finding a great read in the stacks while her children participate in the youth services programs here at the library. She is the co-owner of the children's event website, shoalskids.net, as well as being the wife to Rowdy and mother of 3 young boys. So I'm going to let Nicole take it from here and let her ask Christy some questions, and we'll get started.
Awesome. We want to congratulate you, Christy. This just came out Tuesday, April 28th. So that probably feels like kind of having a baby.
It does. It's so weird. I mean, and it's like, in some ways you feel like it's been out forever, and then it's so funny, like today's like the finish line. This is the last event of launch week, and there's something about launch week that is just, you know, it feels really big. So it's exciting for, you know, to be here with all of you and to be celebrating even during these sort of strange times. And thank you, Abby, for having me, and thank you, Nicole, for interviewing me. This is so great. And thanks to all of you.
Yeah, we're excited. Well, I finished it. It's awesome. It's really kicked off the summer. It's got an awesome setting at the beach. I want to go now, but that may or may not be an option. The characters are so good. They're so interesting, but I was hooked. Page 19, I pretty much didn't put it down. Yeah. There are 2 amazing main characters, Diana and Gray. And so we just want you to tell us a little bit about Feels Like Falling.
Sure. So Feels Like Falling is a story about Diana and Gray, as Nicole said, who are 2 women from very different worlds who meet when they're both having a really bad day, sort of on the heels of a really bad year. Neither one of these women are in a very great place in their life when they meet. And so on a day when Diana could really use a little good luck and Gray could really use a little good karma, instead, Gray inadvertently gets Diana fired from her job. So this is not an ideal way for these two women to meet, but it does sort of thrust them together in this sort of unusual way and sets them on the path to a real true friendship at a time when they could both really use a new friend. And so at first glance, these women don't think they have anything in common, but they realize really quickly that they've both lost their mothers, albeit in very different ways. And they have, Gray's going through a divorce, and Diana has just split up with one in a very long line of bad boyfriends. She is not good at making love life decisions. They're both having kind of a major situation with a sibling. And they're both really just sort of looking to start over and trying to figure out, you know, what the next step in their life will be. And so these two women really come together and they help each other make a lot of decisions and move into what I like to call happily ever after, the sequel.
Very cool. How do you feel like, we don't want to give any spoilers,
Okay.
So I'm going to try to be careful with my questions. First off, what are some themes you feel like everybody can relate to? I mean, you just described a lot of family dynamics, and that's definitely, but I think a room full of women.
Yeah.
What themes?
Yeah. So I definitely, I mean, female friendship is really sort of at the center of this story, more so than any of my other books, I think. I mean, you have, of course, the central friendship with Gray and Diana, but you also, you have Gray and her best friend, Marcy, and her assistant, Trey, who becomes a really good friend. And then kind of like her girls, her summer beach friends, she sees in the summer. And then for Diana, you have this really core group of women who have been her friends since she was a little girl. And I'm really fascinated by friendship. I think it's a really interesting concept, especially as we get older, because, you know, you do have those friendships with people who have known you your entire life, and those friendships are very different from the ones that, you know, maybe you make in your adult life. And not that they're, you know, not as special, but there's something a little bit different. And you can see that in the way that these women interact with each other and the things they say to each other and the level of honesty that they're sort of willing to dole out. So friendship is definitely very, very important. I mean, loss is a really big theme of this book. Diana's mother left Diana and her three siblings when they were small children. So she has sort of spent a lifetime affected by being left as a child and you know, living in different foster homes and some different things like that you know, you'll read about in this story. And then Gray has actually, her mother has just passed away. And so she's dealing with this loss in a really fresh new way. And I did a lot of research about, you know, death and loss and people's feelings about it and how people react in the wake of that. And I was really surprised that one of the most common reactions to death is anger. And it's something that we don't really talk about that much. It's not something that is really like socially acceptable. And so for a variety of reasons that you'll see in this book, Gray is a little bit angry with her mother because she sort of feels like she's left her what she needed most, even though she couldn't help it. But she still feels that way. And so, you know, those are definitely a couple of things I explore. And siblings are also a big part of this book. I write about siblings a lot, which is funny because I'm an only child. But yeah, but Gray's sister Quinn has just married a man who, to put it lightly, Gray thinks is sort of a cult leader, which provides a lot of humor in the book, but is also sort of a serious situation for Gray at the beginning. And then Diana has a special needs brother who lives in a facility where he can be taken care of. And her major goal in life is to be able to get him out and to be able to bring him home to live with her. And so when the story opens and she's lost her job and she's just broken up with her boyfriend and finds herself with no place to live, the first thing she thinks about is, you know, I'm a step farther away from being able to get Philip and being able to have him come home and be here with me. So there's a lot to talk about in this book. I mean, it's, you know, it's definitely like a fun summer read, but there are a lot of issues going on. So I do think it's a good book club book too, because I think there's a lot to discuss.
Definitely. How did you do your read? I mean, you know, you were talking about having a special needs sibling, and even with the, I think it was Click Market, that's the name of her company. There's a web affiliate marketing company. Anyway, how did you do the research for some of those topics?
Well, so for Gray, it was really easy because Gray had started a blog when she was 20 years old. She was very, very young, that just took off and became really successful. And she parlayed it into this affiliate marketing company, which is sort of like the back end of blogging. But I've had an interior design blog with my mom, Beth, for almost 10 years that we started just sort of on a whim. She called me one day and said, I need a new hobby, and, told me this story. And I was like, we should start a blog. And she was like, great. What's a blog? So, this was a decade ago and people weren't really doing that much. But over the past 10 years, we've learned so much about blogging. And I don't have a company like Click Market like Gray does, but I work with a company like Click Market. So I knew a lot about it from the other end that I was able to sort of insert into the story. So her part of the story was pretty easy. For Diana, one of my best friends growing up had a sibling with autism. And I, have had friends and I've known plenty of people, but I had some people to go to be able to interview. One of my really good friends specifically, works with children in the school system who have autism. So being able to really talk to her and kind of figure out, what are, with someone who had severe autism, like her brother, what would be like some medications he was on? What would be therapies he was receiving? What would that look like? And we had to do a lot of research about the state of North Carolina too, and what would happen if you were put in the foster system. Where would you go? Who would take care of you? Would you be able to stay with your sibling? There were a lot of those kinds of issues. Mm-hmm. And of course, this happened 25 or 30 years ago. So things have thankfully have changed a lot for the better in those years. But, we were really looking back at, what would have happened in 1995 if this were the situation. So I was really fortunate just in having, some good friends to be able to talk to, and some lawyers, and just some things like that to be able to figure out, what would be the process that someone would go through in a situation like this. And you see Diana, like he is being taken care of the way that he needs to, although it ends a little differently than she expects, but not in a bad way.
Yeah, I thought you wrote that really well and had I felt like there was some personal experience that had been gathered from that. So, great job. How do you feel like Feels Like Falling is different from some of your other novels, since we've gone from Peachtree, Bluff, and the trilogy? Yeah. It's a different beach type town, and you are still writing with she has two main characters are writing in first person, or written in first person. Yeah. But it's still very different. What do you feel like your biggest differences are?
Well, for one thing, the Peachtree Bluff series is very much a family story. It is if I were going to, describe it in 3 words, it would be Southern family drama. That's what that story is, for sure. And while there are family dynamics involved in this book, this is really much more, a story about friendship. It is set in a similar setting. It's set in Cape Carolina, which is based on Morehead City, which is just over the bridge from where I live in Beaufort. And when I originally wrote this story, and I was sort of saying this when some of you were coming on, but I actually originally wrote this book in 2016. And then I was contracted for the Peachtree Bluff series, which was a total surprise to me. I had an editor call me on the phone and say, I want you to write a series for me. And so that's sort of how the Peachtree Bluff series came to be. And so then in 2019, I came back to Feels Like Falling and completely rewrote it. And it was so interesting for me to see, this story in 2016 and the story in 2019, and it had only been 3 years, but I felt so differently about these women and about the ways that they would react to the situations in their lives. And so that was a really interesting exercise to be able to kind of come back. We had also just lost our house in Hurricane Florence when I came back to rewrite this. And so we moved like 10 times in 15 months. And there's a real feeling of uprootedness in this story. These women are both very sort of uprooted in their lives. And I think, I was sort of feeling some of those things, and not to the degree that Diana is. She finds herself in a place where she really has nowhere to go. But it made it really easy for me to put myself in that situation of like, what would this feel like if I really had nowhere to go? If I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that, and what does it feel like to sort of lose that sense of home as you have known it. So that was kind of, I don't ever want to do that again, but it was an interesting exercise for this story, to be able to sort of feel that sense of your life being a little bit off kilter. And I do think you can feel that in the story, or I hope so. And we're all back there. We're sort of all dealing with that right now. And so in that way, I do feel like it's a good story for right now, because we're all sort of dealing with a completely different life than we have had before, and trying to figure out, where do we go from here, and what is the next chapter going to look like? And that's very similar to what the characters in this book are doing.
Very cool. What do you feel like, what were some of your main inspirations for the book, especially for Gray and Diana's characters?
Yeah, well, I get my story ideas in really strange places. And I was actually doing an interview this morning, and she was like, so, after you plot the book out, then what? And I was like, oh, well, I don't plot the book out. So there's no then what after that. And that's kind of the fun part for me as a writer, is being able to just figure out where this story is going to go as it's going along. And so I actually got the idea in sort of a silly way. I was picking up some photos from a pharmacy, and the photographer told me, the woman behind the counter told me that I couldn't have the pictures because they were professional and I needed to have a signed release. So, being a good girl, I went home, had the release signed, came back and gave it to her, and went along my merry way. But as I was leaving the drugstore that day, I thought, what would happen if someone came in and they didn't have that release? And she gave them the pictures anyway, because she felt like she needed to for some reason. She felt some sort of responsibility for this. And then she lost her job because of that. And I truly went home that afternoon and started writing Feels Like Falling. And I didn't know who these women were. I didn't know what their lives were going to be like. I didn't know the situations that they were in. But it was summer when I was originally drafting this book. And I remember sitting out by the pool and being like, I want to write a really summery, fun love story, redemption story, something that people can really pick up and feel like, okay, summer, beach, fun. And so the setting really, was inspired by that, as were the characters, and especially the secondary characters. I just wanted to, have some fun with them and make this a happy story for people.
I love it. I love it. I also noticed that the main character has one boy child.
Yes.
I didn't know if there were any real life similarities.
And that's what's so weird. Okay, so this is so weird. So, I wrote this book in 2016. At that point, I easily could have had another child between 2016 and 2020. I didn't, but I could have. And my son was 4 years old. And I was writing an 8-year-old in this book, and now my son is 8 years old, and it is shocking. That child, everyone in my family calls him Wagner now. The little boy in the book is named Wagner, and so they are all calling my son Will Wagner, because he's so similar to this character in this book. Even he loves to play tennis, and he's super organized with all his things, and there are just so many similarities, to these two people that it's hilarious. And so now my friends are reading it, of course, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is little Will. And I'm like, it is, but I wrote it 4 years ago. So it was I just sort of dreamed it into life. But it's so strange how stuff like that happens and then ends up, being a part of the story. But yeah, it's pretty funny how that works out.
Just to add to it, I think he just walked by in the background.
He did. He was and I was giving him the eye, because I know he's can you see me? Can you see me? Can you see me? I can see you.
No, we appreciate it. It just brought it more to life.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to be well, Harvey, come say hey to everybody, but.
You bring two characters together who are on opposite sides of the socioeconomic ladder. Was your original goal to show readers how we are ultimately the same, or did you have another thought process as you started to bring that together?
So that was actually not it wasn't my intention. I feel like it's always great when we can, walk away from a book with these lessons and all of those great things. But I also feel like there have been a lot of times, especially recently, where I'm reading a novel and I feel like the author is giving me a sermon on their like, you know, life views or political stance or whatever. And I don't ever want to do that. Like I always want to make sure. So I usually don't go into a book saying, I'm going to write a book about, you know, social class and how we're all the same, because I feel like when I do that, it can end up being kind of preachy. And so, no, so that wasn't initially my goal, but I honestly, you know, when I started this book, I didn't know what the future held for these two women. I did not really even foresee them being able to form the kind of friendship and bond that they do. But the fact that they did, I think ended up kind of making the story about that, which I'm glad about, because I do think, you know, I've said this a couple of times when I'm doing talks. I think it's a story that makes you think like, you know what, maybe I should introduce myself to that person, or, you know, maybe that person that like I see at the library all the time and we've never really talked, like maybe we could be really good friends, even though we don't seem the same. And so I do love that about the story, but I usually, you know, like I said, I never know where the story's going to go. So it's always kind of exciting for me. I actually have to go back at the end and be like, okay, what's the book about? What are the themes? You know, what's the ultimate message here? And so it's kind of fun for me. It's almost like being a reader at the end and trying to figure out, okay, what is the story about? And what do I want people to take away from it?
Love it. Two of the favorite characters are secondary characters, Marcy and Trey, because they bring so much humor. Tell us about writing your secondary characters.
So I don't know why, but secondary characters often end up becoming my favorite characters. And I think it's like you said, they're such good points of comic relief because they don't have to have a major story arc. I don't have to take them on a big journey to redemption. They can just be there along for the ride and they can have a good time and like live their life in the corner, you know? And so I do like that. I mean, I always enjoy writing the secondary characters because I do think they add so much. And the funny thing is, so Marcy, who is Gray's best friend in the story, I love her. She's one of my favorite characters. She's so funny and she just has this really quirky and unique personality and sense of humor. And they're just a good fit for each other. And they don't meet until they're, probably in their late 20s, early 30s. So they have not been friends their entire lives or anything, but they just have this sort of instant bond and connection between each other that I think we do have sometimes in life with people. And so she's great. And actually Trey, who is Gray's assistant, who is just really funny and also incredibly motivated and driven and has all of these sort of ulterior motives for what he's doing in the book and how great he is to Gray and their friendship and all of that. I loved him, but he actually did not appear in this book originally. He was not a part of this book at all. And when I went back, there were a few things, when I went back and read it and I thought, I really want Gray to do this, or I really want that, or I really want to see this. And Trey just like materialized. Like I was just writing, I was like rewriting one of the first chapters and he just appeared. And I was like, well, Trey, there we go. But I adore Trey and I love his relationship with Gray and how he kind of dotes on her and takes care of her because she needs to be taken care of. She's at a really low point in her life and, she just needs someone to take care of her. And so between, Trey and Diane, I kind of help her get back on her feet. But yeah, I think he could be one of my favorites for sure.
Oh, I wanted him to come be my assistant.
Right. Like wouldn't he be great? I know, I think that's like, I was actually hiring an assistant during that time. And I think maybe I was just trying to like bring Trey to life to just come to me, but it didn't.
Great. Oh man. Well, I was definitely on the edge of my seat to see what would happen again, but I was just held by the relationships of these women, just the different types of, we're dealing with family, employer, employee, friendships, all of these things together. Do we expect this to be a continual theme in your writing? Because we see it in Peachtree Bluff too.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think, that's a good point that you make because Gray, she does not have any boundaries. Like the people that are in her life they're in her life. Like she loves them and they're her people. And it doesn't matter, if she's related to them or they're her friends or they work for her or they are her people. And that's just kind of who she is as a person. And I like that about her. I think that's a good quality. It can be complicated, but I think it's a good quality in a person, but it does cause some issues in the book that you see. But overall, I just think it's part of her personality. And she talks about it too. She says, like, I'm always like, the next person I hire, we're going to have these lines. And she never really is quite able to do that because she cares about them and she wants to know them and, be a friend to them and help them on their path. So yeah, I definitely think this is something I've actually already written Under the Southern Sky, which is my 2021 book. I'm so excited for it. It's coming out, I think, next April. I don't have a pub date yet because, as you can imagine, everything's a little crazy in New York. But yeah, but the edits are done, and I do think there's some similar themes. This is a little bit of a different book for me because it does have a male protagonist, which I have not done before, and it actually has 4 protagonists. So it has 3 females and a male protagonist, and I'm excited about kind of showing readers something a little bit different, but you still see a lot of those themes of family and what makes family, maybe even more so in Under the Southern Sky than anything else I've ever written. So I'm excited for it.
Very nice, very nice. Let's see. We also wanted to ask, we never imagined we would be in the quarantine probably while you were writing this, which now I'm finding, we're finding 3 or 4 years ago. How does your life look different at this point? And you talked about the book release was a little different. Do you feel like people want to pick up a book right now and they're not interested in reading?
I think it's just all over the place. So I definitely feel like, personally, obviously my life is very different. I was supposed to leave on book tour April 22nd, and I would have come home May 22nd. I think I was going to like 42 cities or something really crazy, which is exhausting, but it's also very fun. There's something so gratifying about going out, after you've spent all this time working on this book and going out and meeting readers and telling them about it and looking them in the eye while you're signing their book and, all of those things. So it has definitely been different, but I will just have to say I'm extremely impressed at how quickly everyone has adapted to this situation. I think people have been amazing, both, on the book end and then just personally for people to be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to figure out how to use Zoom and get on and go to the library today to hear an author speak. I think that really says a lot about people because, I know for me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, I had never used Zoom in my entire life. Like that wasn't even, I didn't even know, my husband used it, so I knew what it was, but I had no idea. So I feel like everyone's just kind of come together and rallied and been like, all right, what are we going to do? I think authors have really come together in a big way to support each other, support each other's launches, to get together and say, what can we do? I've started doing this thing on Wednesday nights with Mary Kay Andrews, Mary Alice Monroe, Patty Callahan Henry, and Kristen Harmel. And you have to come listen. It's so fun. So we go on Facebook Live and we do like this little live chat for like, 40, 45 minutes on Wednesdays at 7. And it just came out of, we were on Zoom like 2 weeks in a row, like having a glass of wine and chatting. And we were like, you know what, we should do this and like have our readers there and let them ask questions and stuff. And it's been incredible. Just like the number of people that show up for that and that are excited about it. And for how much like fun and connection it gives to us, because it is hard when you don't feel like you're connecting with your readers, especially when this is like the time of year that you're normally doing that. And then of course, homeschooling has been a little different, but not really that big of a deal. At first I thought, oh my goodness, my husband's going to be home from work for who knows how long. So like, I'm going to be working. He's going to be working. Little Will's going to be homeschooling. This is going to be terrible, but it's actually been really great. Like we've kind of had a good time. So it's been fun. The weather's been great. And the town where we live, everybody lives downtown. And so, there's sidewalks. And so when you walk, everybody's on their porches. And so you sort of get to chit chat with everybody, from far away, which is really, that's been very nice because you still sort of feel that connection. This was a much longer answer to this question.
No, that's great. This is great.
But I do feel like, people are going one way or the other. People are either like, I'm reading a book every day because I just want to be in a different world. Or there's some people who are like, I cannot concentrate on anything. And I do think that maybe the more serious books people are not diving into as deeply. The main thing I've heard is that people want to read, beach books, light fiction, or like a twisty thriller, like one or the other, like something that's really going to keep you kind of occupied, or something that's going to make you really happy. And then everything else that kind of like, I don't know if I can get into that right now. So mostly what I'm reading right now is like fun beach stuff, but I'm also doing a lot of blurbs for summer books right now. So that's probably part of the reason.
Obviously this is number one for us, but do you have any suggestions?
Oh, yes. So after you read Feels Like Falling, I do, absolutely. Okay, so 2 that are coming out next week, Hello Summer by Mary Kay Andrews. To be honest, I have not read it yet. I just got it. She sent it to me like 2 days ago. But I've heard so many reviewers say that it's her best book, which I think is really awesome, especially when you're, 26 books in. Jamie Brenner is a favorite of mine. I blurbed this book and it's so good. It's called Summer Longing, which is so great for right now because that's what we're all doing. But it's a great book. It's sort of a baby left on a doorstep kind of situation, but it goes in all these different directions. So that's a really good one. Mary Alice Monroe's new one is coming out in like 3 weeks. It's a part of the Beach House series, if y'all have read that. And it's on Ocean Boulevard. I'm getting all the titles confused because they're all so summery. But it's on Ocean Boulevard and it's great. And then there's one coming out in August called Louisiana Lucky by a newer author. Her name's Julie Pinnell, and it is the cutest book. Abby, you should get it for the library. It's adorable. Okay. It's about these 3 sisters who win the lottery and how their life changes and all these unexpected. It was like the perfect thing to read right now because I was like totally transported, and it was so fun and just like cute, and it was a good summer book. So yeah, so that's my list for right now.
Ooh, that sounds good. Well, what's your have you been able to write during this? Or have you been, this is
so not this week, but I've been fortunate in that just where I was in my process, I've thought about that a lot. If I had to be drafting right now, it would be hard, and I'm going to have to start in a couple of weeks. So I've got to get it together and do it. But when this all first started, I was in edits and I was able to get those done pretty easily. It took me longer than usual, to be honest. I had a hard time, I can put myself in a room for 8 hours and work straight. And someone has to come hand me food because I forget that it's lunch or Tuesday or whatever. So that was not happening for me. That is not happening for me right now. But then when we knew the books were going to come out and we knew I was going to be going on tour, there were so many things to do. And I had all these big lists, and that was great because I was totally occupied and I could just check. But then, I will be probably after next week, I'll start writing again. And I'm working on my first historical novel, which is really exciting. So I have a lot of research to do. And these people are they're real people from North Carolina. I can't tell you too much about it yet, but they have ancestors who are very much alive and well. And so I've been a little bit nervous about that situation. But I talked to some of them yesterday and they were excited about it. And I was like, phew, thank goodness. Because you don't really have to ask permission, but I wasn't going to write about their family if they didn't want me to. And so they were very willing to sit down with me and chat. So that makes me really excited. So I'll probably start doing research next week and then kind of dive into the writing of that. And I'm a little intimidated because it's something new, but I was also intimidated to write a series, and that went well. So, you just have to keep doing new things. And I'm excited enough about the story that I think it'll be worthwhile.
How exciting. Well, those are all the questions I've got. Can we open it up to the floor if anybody wants to ask a question?
Lisa, your background is so pretty. You keep flipping on for me. It's like when the birds chirp, I see your background.
Oh, thank you. We really enjoy it here. We moved here about 3 years ago and have loved it.
It's so pretty.
Thanks.
Will there be any more in the series? Will there be a 4th in the?
I don't know. So I have an idea for a 4th in the series. This series has actually been optioned for a TV show, which is exciting. And it's, you know, there's a lot to be done. And of course it's a weird time, but a lot of people have been hired and, you know, a lot of good stuff is happening for it. So my sort of gut feeling is that if that gets made, everyone's going to want, I mean, I get a lot of emails from readers wanting a fourth Peachtree Bluffs book, but you know, my publisher is like, we said it was going to be 3 books. It's been 3 books. So I think if the TV show happens, I'll probably write another one for multiple reasons. But, you know, one, because it would be great, you know, for me to be able to sort of write the continuation of the story in a way, because I don't want to write the TV show and I don't want to move to LA. So they did offer me that, which was nice,
Oh, wow.
but I don't want to do that. So it would be kind of a nice way for me to like be a part of that if it does happen. Also, Beaufort, where I live, we did this Peachtree Bluff town takeover last year, and we had all these tours around town and all these big events. And so I've had so many people say, we need another town takeover. And so I'm like, okay, well, if I write a 4th book, we'll do another town takeover. But I do have the idea. So it's just, you know, whether I end up going for it or not. But I kind of think I will, because I miss Peachtree Bluff. I loved those ladies and I missed them. So
It was wonderful. They were wonderful. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Sorry.
Any other questions?
Was there something in particular that made you want to write historical novels? Because I've noticed there's been a little bit of a trend to that. Everybody's very interested in historical fiction now, and I just wondered if there was something in particular that drew you to.
Yeah, well, and I can actually tell you this story, which is kind of, so it's not a full historical novel, it's a contemporary historical novel. And I have been planning this book for years. It's about a wedding veil that's like a family heirloom. And I was going to write it based on, I wore my husband's grandmother's wedding veil, and it's this beautiful veil, and it has this whole story about how, you know, these nuns in Paris, I mean, it's this whole thing. And all these women have worn it. So, like, not even just family members, like some of my friends have worn it, some of my sister-in-law's friends have worn it, my cousin on the other side of my family, I mean, like dozens of women have worn this wedding veil. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to tell the stories of the people who had worn this veil?
Yeah.
And so when I was pitching this idea, my agent said, well, what if you wrote about a real historical wedding veil and like the real people who had worn it, but you made it, because I wanted it to have a contemporary storyline still. And so she's like, that way you could write about, you know, a historical storyline and a contemporary storyline. And I thought, oh yeah, no problem, like needle in a haystack. Let me just go find a historical wedding veil to write about that like fits my story and is someone I want to write about and is someone I can research and all of those things. And there had been a historical figure that I had just been really interested in, and I'd sort of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to write something about her one day. So I Googled her name and wedding veil, and all this stuff came up. And so there's this kind of whole mystery behind what happened to this wedding veil that had been in this really famous family for, you know, centuries. And I was like, wow, well, that's weird. That sort of worked out really easily. So then I was telling a friend that I wanted to write this, and I was going to Chapel Hill to do some research on it at the library. But she was like, oh, well, you know, your backdoor neighbor, he's her grandson. And I was like,
Oh my gosh.
I had no idea. So I was like, okay, well, I'm supposed to write this story. And I honestly think that's what happens to people. Like when I talk to people who have written historicals, because there's another historical that I know I will write at some point because I just know I'm supposed to write it. But it's not necessarily like a direction I'm going to go in my career. And I think people who don't like historical fiction, it will be fine because it's not super historical. There's still a contemporary element to it. But it is kind of interesting to just go that different way and to have something sort of real, you know, a real element to your stories. But yeah, a lot of people have been switching. And I do think too, I think there used to be this thing where you started writing and you got really put in this box and you could only write what you started writing. And I think that doesn't happen so much anymore. And so people, I think readers are a little more like, you know, we'll go there with you and then we'll go back to the beach, you know, whatever. I think readers have become a little more attuned to that. So we'll see. I don't know. I haven't started it yet, so I might not end up writing it anyway, but
That sounds like it'd be good.
Yeah, it does.
All right. Well, I thank y'all so much for having me and spending your afternoon with me. It was so fun. My last event of my pub week, so that's exciting.
Congratulations. That's
And I hope
great.
y'all enjoy Feels Like Falling.
Yes, very much. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and
Thank you.
Abby will be contacting everybody about their book. So
Thank you so
look
much for
forward
putting
to
it on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Right.
you, Abby. And thanks to everybody for reading and for being here. Y'all have a good day. And thank you, Nicole. That was
Sounds
great. You were a great interviewer.
thanks, Christy. It's my first go. So
You did a great job. And the funny thing is, I saw your questions, but I didn't look at them because I like to be fresh.
Mhm. They're Abby's questions. I don't know. She's
Well,
next
Abby's
to me.
questions- With Abby, they were really good questions.
Thank
They were
you.
really, really good. And there were some things I hadn't answered yet, so that was really
Okay.
fun.
That's good.
Good.
All right, y'all enjoy your afternoon. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Bye. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.